Right, good morning, Form 5. Lots of videos today. We're looking now at a 7-point question related to issues around population density. Population structure. We walk through population pyramids, interpretation, reading, explaining why they are the way they are using common sense. But now we're going to look at a 7-point question for which you're going to have to know your case studies, okay? I will give you an example 7 out of 7 answer, which in itself is a case study. So if you're broken and don't have a case study at this stage, use this one, okay? Now, what are we looking at here? Oh yeah, there we go. For a named country you have studied. Same, isn't it? For a named country you have studied. Describe and explain. So you're not just saying it has this, it has that, it has that. Explain why it has these things based on your geographical knowledge. For a named country you have studied, describe and explain the impacts of having a large percentage of dependent population. Now, you should know what dependent population is. We covered that in the last videos. It is the portion of low people, children below 16 that are not working, and it's people above 65 or whatever it is that are not working. Okay, it's the people in the middle, the economically active, you saw it broken down on the charts, that are paying the taxes to drive the services. If you have a large percentage of dependent populations, you are going to have revenue problems. You are going to not have a huge amount of money to deal with all this. Think about a less economic developed country in stage two of the demographic transition model when they've got that pyramid shape. It's got the pyramid shape because it's got so many young people at the bottom. They are dependents. Okay, how are we paying for their health, schooling, etc.? Often places don't, and they fall into rack and ruin. The opposite could be true if you're at stage 4 or 5, where you start to get this. All right, you might have a smaller bottom, but you've got a bigger top because you've got a lot of old people now, and they've got to be paid for pensions, hip replacements. Okay, so for a named country you've studied, describe and explain the impacts of having a large percentage of dependent population. The indicative content, sort of things you could discuss, okay? A high dependency ratio, that's the term, remember. A high dependency ratio increases pressure on the cost of healthcare provision, increased pressure on schools, nurseries for young, high unemployment rates, okay? Housing shortages. There's not enough place for all these dependents to live. The command term word describe requires you to state the key impacts of having large percent of dependent population. The command word explain requires you to say how and why these impacts affect the country. This is a leveled response answer. It is important to remember that each point does not equate to a mark. The examiner will read your whole answer and make a decision about which level you fit into. If you do not name a country or a country you choose is not appropriate, you will only gain a maximum of 5 marks if you really know your stuff. But to get maximum, you really need to name and identify your country. Where is it? Is it low or high economic developed based on the question? We're probably talking about either a very low economic developed country here or perhaps a high one if you're using the older population. But if it's a low economic country, it's going to probably have a high youthful population. Okay, so the high dependency ratio, the number of people working age is dwarfed by the number of young people, and how we're paying for all this. Um, we could get growth of informal settlements, people just having to build these makeshift houses to accommodate all these young people, for example. Food shortages, not enough food to feed everyone. Okay, pressure on clean water supplies. Water supplies are limited in many places. If you've got millions and millions of people being born, are they going to get access to this? Eventually, that will put pressure on migration. All these young people, as they come of age, will have to start moving from the countryside to find employment. Okay, the increased immigration. Um, if it's aging population, which is the other end of the spectrum, you've got too many old people, such in stage 4 or 5, usually in more wealthier countries, you do still have a high dependency ratio, but you have increased pressure on healthcare costs. Old people get sick and they need lots of healthcare provisions. Okay. They might need services, mobility services to get about. Old people get pensions. Pensions come from tax. So you need a lot of people paying tax to pay the pensions, okay? Shortage of workers. We have this in all over the world at the moment. Maybe AI will fix it, but we have a shortage of workers. Mauritius has a shortage of workers, and it's bringing in hundreds of thousands of immigrants from Madagascar, from Nepal, from Bangladesh, okay? China is the same. Most places are doing this because there is a shortage. Everyone's too old and they haven't got the base. Um, Taxes could go up. Okay. Now, here's a model answer. It's actually from Nigeria. I think this was one of your case studies. You need to know your case studies, guys, and you need to know this amount of stuff about your case studies. Let's introduce Nigeria for 2 points. Nigeria, they're not just saying my case study is Nigeria. They're giving us an introduction to Nigeria for 2 full points, okay? Nigeria's population grew from 3.3 million in 1960 to nearly 25 million in 2021. Nigeria now has a high dependency ratio with almost 50% of the population aged 15 and below. They've really introduced Nigeria and why it fits this question about population ratios, dependency ratios, okay? So now let's hear the knowledge and the description and the explanation of Nigeria. This is the issue. Massive population growth between 1960 and 2021. This has led to a number of problems, such as increased pressure on farmland and food supplies. Well, of course it will do. You've got 22 extra million people over a few decades. Where's that food coming from? Okay. They have food shortages, okay, and land, good arable land to grow food, which is estimated at 2.5 million people suffering from food insecurity. So they don't always know where their next meal is coming from, basically. It is also very difficult to provide schooling for such a large youthful population. 4 out of 10 girls in Nigeria finish primary school. It's a very small amount. But again, if you've got 22 million people hitting over 40 years, if you've got to build schools and infrastructure, and that costs money and planning, and these places just don't have this, okay? This contributes to continued high birth rate because you've got all these young girls not going to school, not being educated, and what do in life? They get to 16, maybe younger, they themselves get pregnant and they exacerbate this problem, okay? Um, they can often marry young, and there's lack of education about contraception, and probably no one to pay for contraception anyway. Okay, the fertility rate in Nigeria is an average of 7 children per woman. Okay, think about that, 7 per woman, one of the highest in the world. Another challenge is providing enough job opportunities and housing for people. Makes sense, common sense, isn't it? This has led to high rates of rural urban migration as people seek jobs in the capital city, Niamey. You know, if you're one of hundreds of thousands of young people growing up in the middle of nowhere with no opportunity, what do? You migrate to the town in the hope of finding something, okay? However, when they arrive in the city, people are faced with housing shortages. Of course they are, and end up living in informal settlements at the edge of town. Of course they do. You know, they just join the sprawling masses of shanty towns, basically. This creates high population densities, leads to problems of overcrowding, poor hygiene, shortages of clean water, maybe increased crime, and the lack of infrastructure means that there is inadequate sanitation and healthcare, which can lead to the spread of disease. These issues contribute to one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, leading people to have more children to ensure that some survive into adulthood. Okay, high child mortality rate because of poor sanitation, poor healthcare. A lot of young children die. This perpetuates the problem of the high dependency ratio. So we've got, it's a very well presented case study here. It's not long, but it says exactly what it needs to say. It's two paragraphs, but it's on topic. Okay. So you need using phrases such as this leads to and this contributes to will help you to extend your explanation. Okay. Because you describe something, it has poor sanitation, it has poor healthcare. This leads to a higher child mortality rate, which in turn results in people needing to have more children to ensure some survive. Phrases like this leads to or this contributes to very much suit that command term explain. Okay. Be specific with names, any data. Okay. The data they give from 3 million to 25 million between 60 and 2021 is excellent data. Okay. So, guys, I'm going to stop that one now. These are really important, these 7 point question videos. I do hope you get to see quite a few today. Okay. Right. Take care. Next one soon.